This all happened back in the late spring of 22, not that long ago really. At the time, I was living in this old, two-story house on a street lined with oak trees that arched over the road like gnarled hands. It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone kept to themselves, but nodded politely when you passed. I worked as a graphic designer, so my days were pretty much the same. Wake up, coffee, sit in front of a screen for 8 hours, and then decompress with a cold beer and some video games. It was a simple, quiet life. Maybe too quiet. I remember that Tuesday because it was pouring rain, the kind of heavy, gray downpour that makes the whole world feel muted and sad. I got home around 6 p.m., exhausted and ready to just crash on the couch. I was fumbling with my keys, trying to unlock the door while juggling my laptop bag when I saw it. Sitting right there on my front porch, pushed against the door, was a box. Not a regular Amazon box or anything. This one was different. It was just a plain brown cardboard box, but the way it looked, it was all wrong. The cardboard was a darker, thicker kind than what you see every day, and it was warped and stained. There were these splotchy, dark brown marks all over it, like someone had spilled something on it and it had dried. The tape holding it shut was thick and clear, but there was a strange, almost greasy film on it that made me hesitate. No label, no return address, nothing. My first thought was that a neighbor had left it by mistake, maybe for someone else on the street. I picked it up, and it felt heavier than I expected. A dull, dense weight, not like books or electronics. It felt like something soft and solid was inside. The rain was coming down harder, and the last thing I wanted was to leave it there to get soaked, so I figured I'd just take it inside and deal with it later. I remember the smell, too. It wasn't a bad smell, but it was unique, a mix of damp earth and something vaguely metallic, like old coins. I carried it into the house and set it on the floor of the entryway, just staring at it for a minute. The whole thing felt off, like a glitch in the quiet routine of my day, but that's exactly how it felt. Like a record scratch in the middle of a perfect song. I stood there for a good 2 minutes, my brain trying to process why this strange, heavy package was on my doorstep. My curiosity finally won out. I grabbed a pair of scissors from the kitchen junk drawer and kneeled down. The tape was tougher than it looked, and when I finally sliced through it, the cardboard let out this awful, tearing sound, like old skin ripping. I peeled back the flaps, and the first thing that hit me was the smell, way stronger now. It was definitely metallic, but something else too, something sickly sweet and thick. It was the smell of a forgotten butcher shop, the kind you walk past and instinctively hold your breath. I leaned in, and that's when I saw it. The contents weren't anything I could have ever imagined. It was a pile of clothes, but not like any I'd ever seen. A t-shirt, torn in half at the torso, and a pair of jeans, ripped from the thigh all the way down to the ankle. Both were soaked, not with water, but with a dark, viscous liquid that stained the fabric a deep reddish brown. It was blood, and not just a little, either. The shirt was stiff with it, and the denim looked like it had been dragged through a crimson swamp. My stomach clenched into a hard knot, and a cold dread started to spread through my chest. I felt like my lungs had forgotten how to work. The air in the room felt thick and suffocating. My hands started to shake, and I instinctively pushed myself back, away from the box, as if it were a bomb about to go off. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the scene. Who would do this? Why? I almost convinced myself it was some kind of sick joke, a prank gone way too far. But then I saw the note. It was a small, folded piece of paper lying at the bottom of the box, untouched by the mess. I picked it up, my fingers trembling, and unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, almost elegant, in a stark contrast to the violence in the box. It was written in a dark ink, and it simply said, "Now it's your turn to carry this." My blood ran cold. The note wasn't a question or a threat. It was a statement, a declaration. My heart pounded against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. I didn't know what it meant, but the implications were terrifying. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the whole box and rushing to the nearest trash can in the alley behind my house. I didn't care about a trace or anything. I just wanted it out of my sight, out of my life. I pushed it deep down into the can, then doused it with a little leftover gasoline I had in the garage. I didn't light it, but the smell made me feel like I had some control over the situation. I just wanted it gone, erased from existence. I went back inside, showered, scrubbing my hands until they were raw, but the feeling of that box lingered. The image of those bloodied clothes was seared into my brain. The night was already dark, and the rain hadn't stopped, but as I glanced out my living room window, something caught my eye. A car, parked directly across the street from my house, facing it. Its lights were off, and it wasn't moving. Just sitting there in the dark, silent and still. I couldn't see anyone inside, but I had this overwhelming, horrifying feeling that someone was watching me. The world outside felt like it had just shrunk to the size of my house. And I was the only person in it. The car stayed there for what felt like an eternity. 10 minutes, maybe 15. The rain was a constant drum against the window, but all I could hear was the frantic pounding of my own heart. I kept trying to convince myself it was nothing, just someone waiting for a ride or a delivery driver on break. But the longer it sat there, the more I knew that wasn't true. No one just sits in the dark like that, especially on a Tuesday night in the middle of a downpour. It felt like a deliberate act, a statement. I crept away from the window, keeping my body low, and moved to my bedroom, pulling the blinds shut. I felt this intense need to hide, to disappear. I couldn't bring myself to call the police. What would I even say? Hi, some crazy person left a box of bloody clothes on my doorstep, and now a car is parked across the street. They'd think I was crazy, or worse, that I was involved in something I wasn't. I ended up staying awake the entire night, peeking through the blinds every hour. The car never moved. Not once. It just sat there, a silent, black void in the street. The next morning, the car was gone. The sun was out, and everything felt ridiculously normal. I tried to shake off the previous night's terror, to convince myself it was all a weird, isolated incident. But as I went to leave for work, something made me stop at the front door. The doormat. It was perfectly aligned, but something was different. A small, brown rock was sitting on the corner of it. I'd never seen it before. It was just a small, unremarkable stone, but it wasn't there when I left for work the day before, and I certainly didn't put it there. A cold feeling, the same one from the night before, washed over me. It felt like a calling card, a way of saying I was here. The whole day at work was a blur. My mind kept replaying the events, the box, the clothes, the note, the car. I couldn't focus. I'd stand up to get coffee and find myself just staring into space, lost in thought. My coworker, Sarah, asked me if I was okay, and I just mumbled something about not sleeping well. I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone. How could I? It felt like a dark secret, something that had been thrust upon me that I was now forced to carry alone. The thought of that car, of that rock, made my skin crawl. It was like I was being watched, even when I was completely alone. This happened almost every day for the next week. The rock would be moved, a new one would appear. Each time, it was slightly different. One day, a small, black feather was on the doormat. Another, a single, perfectly white matchstick, like it had just been broken off a new book. Each item was small, insignificant on its own, but together, they formed a pattern. A terrifying, silent communication. The message was clear. I am here. I can get to you. And then came the second box. This one was left on my doorstep exactly 1 week after the first. I saw it from my car as I pulled into my driveway after work. My stomach twisted into a knot of pure panic. I just sat there in my car, staring at it for a full minute, my mind screaming at me to drive away, to just keep going and never look back. But I couldn't. It felt like I was already caught in this horrible current, and the only way was to face it. I got out of the car, my legs feeling like lead, and approached the box. It was a smaller box this time, but the same kind of cardboard, the same ugly stains. It felt lighter, too, but no less menacing. I carried it inside, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. This time, there was no sick curiosity, only dread. I set it on the table in my living room, grabbed a knife, and cut the tape with a single, sharp motion. I flung the flaps open, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't a pile of bloody clothes. It was my keychain. My old, worn-out keychain with the little metal bottle opener on it that I'd had for years. The one I used for my house key. But that wasn't possible. I had it with me. I always did. But when I reached into my pocket, it wasn't there. My stomach dropped. I had used it to lock the door that morning. I was sure of it. It was gone, and now here it was, in this box. Someone had been in my house. Someone had walked right in, while I was probably just a few feet away, oblivious. My hands flew to the back of my neck, and I could feel the hair standing on end. The thought of a stranger, a predator being inside my home, in my space, while I was there. It was a violation on a level I can't even describe. It was a cold, brutal, and intimate act of terror. The fear was a physical presence in the room with me. It was in the silence, in the way the shadows clung to the corners. I didn't even have to open my door to know the car was back. I could feel its presence outside, just like I could feel the presence of the person who had been in my house. It was a feeling that crawled up my spine and into my skull, a certainty that someone was watching. I finally caved. I picked up my phone, my fingers fumbling as I dialed 911. The dispatcher sounded calm, almost bored, and her voice felt like it was coming from a different universe. I tried to explain what was happening, the boxes, the clothes, my missing keychain. I tried to sound coherent, but I could hear the desperation in my own voice. She transferred me to a detective, a man named Miller. His voice was deeper, more serious. I retold the whole story, from the first box to the keychain. There was a long pause on the other end of the line after I finished. The silence was more terrifying than anything he could have said. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "Look, I'm not going to lie to you. We've had a few similar cases in the last couple of months. Same MO. Disturbing packages left on doorsteps, then small personal items start to disappear. Sometimes it's a photograph, a book. It's a way of marking the victim. We believe it's a form of psychological manipulation, of building up to something bigger." My heart was in my throat. I couldn't breathe. "What do you mean, building up?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We don't know for sure," he said. "But in the other cases, the activity stops abruptly. Then, a few weeks later, we have a break-in. We don't have any confirmed connections yet, but we have a strong suspicion that whoever is doing this, they're finishing the job, so to speak. We can't tell you to leave your home, but we do advise you to be extremely vigilant. We'll increase patrols in your area, but we can't be everywhere at once." His words hit me like a physical blow. He was telling me that this wasn't just a sick joke. It was a prelude, a countdown. I was a target. Someone had chosen me. The thought was paralyzing. I hung up the phone and walked to the front window. The car was there, of course, just like the night before. But this time, I wasn't just afraid. I was terrified that I spent the next 2 weeks living on a knife's edge. Every sound, every shadow, was a threat. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The quiet suburban street that once felt so safe now felt like a death trap. I installed a camera system, changed my locks, and bought a motion sensor light for the front of the house. I even slept with a baseball bat next to my bed, a pathetic attempt to arm myself against a threat I couldn't even see. The packages stopped. The small objects stopped appearing on my doormat. The car was gone for a few nights, and I started to feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe the police presence had scared them off. Maybe they had moved on to a new victim. I was just starting to feel like I could breathe again, like maybe this nightmare was finally over. I'd come home from work and not have that immediate feeling of dread. It was still there, but it was buried a little deeper. That night was the first time in 2 weeks that I felt a semblance of peace. I had a beer, watched a movie, and actually felt sleepy for the first time in ages. I turned off the TV around midnight and went to bed, falling asleep almost instantly. I was in a deep, dreamless sleep, but then I was yanked out of it by a sound that didn't belong. It was a click, a sharp, distinct, mechanical sound that cut through the silence of the night like a knife. It was the sound of my front door, the one I had locked and double-checked just hours before, being unlocked. The sound was followed by a faint creak as the door slowly, deliberately, began to open. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. The baseball bat was a foot away from me on the floor, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My eyes were wide open in the dark, and I could hear the slow, deliberate creak of the door swinging inward. My mind was screaming, "This is it. This is what Miller was talking about." I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that they had come to finish what they started. I lay there, paralyzed, listening to the sound of someone stepping into my house. The footsteps were slow, measured, and then they stopped. They were just inside, on the other side of my living room, waiting. I don't know why they were waiting. Maybe to hear if I was home. Maybe to let the fear build up. Maybe to just let me know they were there. I didn't make a sound. I couldn't. I was trapped in my own terror. I listened to the silence, to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, to the slow, heavy breaths I was holding in my chest. The silence was what finally broke me. It was so thick, so deliberate. It felt like a presence standing over my bed. but there was no one there. The footsteps never came. It was just the sound of my own panic. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, it stopped. A full minute of silence passed before I heard a faint, slow closing of the door. The familiar click of it locking again. The steps were muffled as they moved away from the house, and I heard the faint sound of a car door closing. The engine started, a low rumble that faded into the distance. It was over, just like that. I lay there for what felt like hours, listening, waiting, but nothing came. The rest of the night was silent. The next morning, I called Miller, told him what happened. He was sympathetic, but he said they couldn't do anything without proof. No broken locks, no signs of forced entry. I knew it was true. They didn't need to break in. They had a key, my key, and my keychain. I don't know if it was a warning or if they were playing some kind of twisted game. But I know one thing. They left something for me that night. I didn't find it until I was about to leave for work. It was a single, small key left on the porch, right where the first box had been. A key I had never seen before. I didn't know what it unlocked, but I knew it was meant for me. I moved out of that house a month later. I still have the key, tucked away in a small box I never opened. And I still wonder, every single day, what it unlocks, and who it belongs to. This all happened about 5 years ago, back when I was still living in that little house on Maple Street. It was a cozy place, a 2-bedroom bungalow with a massive backyard that was mostly weeds, but I loved it. I was in my late 20s, working as a graphic designer, and honestly, life was pretty simple. My days were a blur of client work, coffee, and trying to keep my old dog, Buster, from eating the furniture. He was this grumpy, lovable beagle mix with a patchy coat and one floppy ear that never stood upright. The neighborhood was one of those places where you knew all your neighbors, or at least you'd wave at them from your porch. It was always quiet after dark, the kind of quiet where you could hear the wind rustling through the leaves and the distant hum of the highway. I felt completely safe there, like nothing bad could ever touch me. I was just living my little life, wrapped up in my own world, unaware of the cracks that were starting to form just beneath the surface. It's funny how a single night can shatter that sense of security and make you question everything you thought you knew about the world. The night it all went down, I was in a pretty typical state for me. It was around 2:30 a.m., and I was still up, buried in a design project that was due the next morning. My office was in the spare room, and the only light came from my monitor, casting a bluish glow on the walls. Buster was snoring away on his dog bed by the window, letting out these little snorts that sounded like a tiny pig. I remember feeling a bit of a chill, so I got up to grab a hoodie, and as I walked past the living room, I heard a sound. It was faint at first, barely a tap, 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 but it was there. My heart did this weird little flip-flop, a mix of curiosity and dread. It was too late for visitors, and I couldn't think of a single reason anyone would be knocking on my door at that hour. I froze, holding my breath and trying to figure out if it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. That's when it started again, louder this time. 3 distinct, firm knocks. Not aggressive, not frantic, just persistent. It was the kind of knock that demanded your attention, a sound that cut through the silence of the night and made it feel heavy. I walked slowly towards the front door, my bare feet silent on the cold wood floor. The peephole was the only thing I trusted. I held my breath, my eye pressed against the tiny glass circle, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There was a man standing there, illuminated by the porch light, holding a brown paper bag. He was wearing a delivery uniform, a dark blue shirt with a small, faded logo on the breast that I couldn't quite make out in the dim light. His face was pale and gaunt, with tired eyes that seemed to have seen too much, and a thin, wiry mustache that drooped at the corners of his mouth. He was just standing there, looking directly at the peephole, as if he knew I was on the other side. A shiver ran down my spine. Who orders a package for 3 a.m.? The whole thing felt wrong, like a scene from a bad horror movie, and the logic of it just didn't compute with me. The world outside my door suddenly felt like a different universe that I didn't open the door. I just stood there, frozen, my mind racing. A shaky voice, muffled by the solid oak door, spoke from the other side. "I have a package for you, ma'am. Needs a signature." I didn't say anything, just kept my eye glued to the peephole. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. I didn't order anything. I whispered to myself, but it was like he heard me anyway. He didn't even flinch. He just repeated, "It's for you. It's addressed to you. Just need a quick signature." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, and something in its tone set off every single alarm bell in my head. I could see his hand slowly reaching out, his fingers inching towards the doorknob. My heart hammered against my ribs like a frantic bird trying to escape a cage. The sound of the lock turning felt impossibly loud in the stillness, and for a terrifying moment, I was sure he was going to get in. That's when I knew this wasn't just a simple mix-up. This was something else entirely. That's when the terror really kicked in. I started backing away from the door, my whole body trembling. My mind was screaming at me to call the police, but my hands felt like they were made of lead. The man on the other side of the door was no longer just a delivery guy. His face, which was already pale, seemed to contort into something menacing, and his eyes narrowed into slits. I heard the distinct click of the doorknob turning, followed by a low, guttural growl of frustration as it refused to budge. He started rattling it, and the sound echoed through the quiet house, a harsh, violent noise that made my stomach churn. "Open the door," he hissed, his voice no longer flat, but filled with a terrifying rage. "Open it now. You need to sign this." It wasn't a request anymore. It was a demand, a threat. I scrambled backwards until my back hit the wall, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Buster, startled by the commotion, started barking his head off, a deep, protective sound that was more comforting than I can describe. That I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I dialed 911, my voice a whispery mess as I tried to explain what was happening. The operator, a calm, steady voice named Sarah, kept me on the line. "Stay on the phone with me, ma'am. We have units on the way. Do not open the door under any circumstances." She asked me to describe the man, but it was hard. Every detail of his face was a blur of fear in my memory. I could still hear the furious rattling of the doorknob, the scraping of his shoes on the porch, but then it just stopped. The silence that followed was even more unnerving than the noise. I stayed glued to the phone, listening, waiting. The moment the sirens got closer, a high-pitched wail in the distance. I saw a flash of movement through the peephole. He was gone. The porch was empty. There was nothing but the porch light and the stillness of the night. The police arrived minutes later, 2 officers, a man and a woman. They checked the area, took my statement, but found nothing. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. They told me it was probably a prank, a weird delivery mix-up, and that I should try not to worry. But I knew better. That I couldn't sleep a wink that night. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the house was a footstep. The next few days were a blur of jumpiness and paranoia. I checked the locks 3 times before I went to bed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The logical part of my brain kept trying to tell me it was a one-off event, a bizarre fluke, but my gut knew something else was going on. My gut was screaming at me. A week later, my friend Lisa, who's an absolute wizard with tech, came over to install a new security camera system. She said, "Just for peace of mind, girl, we'll get you a good one." She put a camera right above my front door and another in the backyard. She set up the app on my phone and showed me how to review the footage. I felt a little silly at first, like I was overreacting, but the truth is, the thought of being able to see who was outside my house gave me a weird sense of power and control I hadn't felt since that night. I didn't think I'd find anything, but a couple of days later, the paranoia was getting to me, and I decided to go through the footage just to be sure. I started with the night of the incident, fast-forwarding through hours of nothingness until I got to the exact time he was at my door. I watched it again, seeing the grainy footage of the man in the delivery uniform, the way he moved, the way he seemed to stare directly into the camera lens with those dead eyes. But then, as I kept scrubbing through the footage, I noticed something else. A flicker of movement in the bushes across the street. I rewound and zoomed in. And there he was, sitting in a car, watching my house. My breath hitched in my throat. I skipped back a few days, and there he was again, this time disguised as a jogger with a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, walking slowly down my street. I fast-forwarded more and found him multiple times, once dressed in a hooded sweatshirt, holding a phone to his ear like he was on a call, and another time in a painter's uniform, carrying a bucket. It was always him. The same gaunt face, the same weird, wiry mustache. The footage was a nightmare loop of him, my front door, and the street. It wasn't a delivery mix-up. It wasn't a prank. He had been watching me for weeks. It felt like every moment I thought I was alone, I wasn't. He was a constant, unseen presence in my life. It was a violation so deep it made me sick to my stomach. My little safe haven on Maple Street, the place I thought was my sanctuary, was a fishbowl, and I was the goldfish. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't just lurking, he was studying my routine. He knew when I was home, he knew what I was doing, and he chose that night, that specific hour, because he thought I would be alone and most vulnerable. I saw him in the footage standing on my porch, not with the impatient posture of a delivery driver, but with a deliberate, sinister stillness, as if he was savoring the moment. It was a chilling performance, and I was the unwitting star. The paper bag he was holding wasn't a real package, I realized. It was just a prop, a pathetic excuse for what he was really there for. It was a cruel, twisted game. I called the police again, this time with a clear, solid piece of evidence. I showed them the footage on my laptop, the dates, the times, the different disguises. The look on the officers' faces was different this time. It was no longer dismissive. It was serious, concerned. They immediately took the footage and told me they would open a full investigation. The next few days were a blur of questions, forensic analysis, and a sense of unease that never left me. They told me that the man was likely a scout, a part of a larger, organized crime ring that targeted single women. They told me his goal wasn't just to steal a package. It was to gain access to my home, to me. They confirmed that the delivery company he was pretending to work for was completely fake. The whole thing was a performance, a sick charade designed to get me to lower my guard. They told me to be vigilant, to stay with a friend or family member if possible, and to be careful. They put extra patrols on my street, but it was just a temporary fix. It was a comfort, but the truth was, I felt like a permanent mark. The fear never really went away. The police never caught him, or at least they never told me they did. I kept checking the footage, every single day, every single night, waiting, dreading the moment I would see his face again. He was gone, though. He never showed up on my cameras again. The stillness returned to Maple Street, but it was a different kind of stillness now. It was filled with echoes of that night, with the memory of that terrifying knock and the face of that man. I sold the house a few months later. I just couldn't live there anymore. Every time I looked out a window, I saw him. Every time I heard a car door slam, my heart would jump. I moved to a small apartment in the city, an anonymous building with a doorman and multiple security cameras. I still have Buster with me, and he still snores just as loud. He's my shadow, my protector, and the one thing that reminds me of who I was before all this. But even now, I check my peephole before I open the door. I glance over my shoulder when I'm walking down the street. The experience left a permanent scar on my psyche. I'll never know what would have happened if I had opened that door. What he was planning, what he was going to do. The paper bag he held, what was inside it? A weapon? Something to restrain me with? The questions haunt me to this day. I've heard other stories on these forums about delivery scams and people pretending to be someone they're not. It's a common story now, but for me, it's not just a story. It's a lived experience. It's the moment I lost my innocence, the moment the quiet, simple life I had built for myself was shattered, replaced by a constant, nagging fear. The fear that somewhere out there, the same gaunt man with the wiry mustache is still out there, maybe watching someone else's house, waiting for the perfect moment. This was about a year and a half ago, and I was living in a small apartment on the third floor of an old building downtown. It was nothing special, just a couple of rooms, a kitchenette, and a balcony that overlooked a busy intersection. I was 23, fresh out of college, and working my first real job as a software developer for a small startup. My life was pretty simple. Coding all day, a quick stop at the gym, and then back home to eat whatever microwave meal I could find and maybe play some video games. My roommate had moved out a month earlier, and I was enjoying the peace and quiet. The whole building was mostly young people and older couples who kept to themselves, so I felt completely anonymous, which was just how I liked it. It was the kind of life where the most dramatic thing that happened was the coffee machine breaking or the Wi-Fi cutting out. I was totally convinced I was in control of my own little world, oblivious to the fact that someone or something was about to completely shatter that illusion. The night it happened, I was just a regular guy on a regular Tuesday, thinking about nothing more than whether I should order pizza or settle for some instant ramen. The evening was unfolding like any other. I was deep into a coding session, headphones on, a half-empty mug of coffee on my desk, when a strange vibration came from my phone, which was sitting on the corner of my desk. It wasn't a text or a call. It was a notification from an app one hadn't even opened in months. I glanced at the screen, and the words blurred into focus. "Your order is on the way." My brow furrowed. What order? I hadn't bought anything online in days, and I certainly hadn't ordered anything for delivery. I swiped the notification away, figuring it was a bug, some kind of weird ad glitch. But then, a minute later, it buzzed again. This time I opened the app, and my heart did a little lurch. The screen showed a map, with a tiny car icon moving steadily closer to my location. The tracker said the driver was just blocks away, heading straight for my street. A cold feeling started to creep up my spine. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what was going on. It wasn't just a random ad. This was a live, active delivery, and it was coming to my door that a genuine panic started to set in. I tapped frantically on the app, trying to find a cancel button, a phone number, anything. But the options were all grayed out, unresponsive. The little car icon was now turning onto my street. I could see it on the map, a tiny, digital representation of something terrifyingly real, pulling up right in front of my building. I knew I should just ignore it, pretend I wasn't home, but a part of me, that stupid, naive part, was morbidly curious. What was it? Who ordered it? And how could it be connected to me? Just as the little car icon stopped, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was unknown, a random string of digits I'd never seen before. My heart pounded against my ribs like a hammer. I didn't want to answer it, but my hand moved on its own. I picked it up, my voice barely a whisper. "Hello." A low, calm voice on the other end answered. "I'm outside. Can you open the door?" It wasn't a question, it was a command. A shiver ran down my spine, even though the room was warm. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. I think you have the wrong person. I didn't order anything." The voice on the other end chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, I don't think so, my first name. The order is most definitely for you." The sound of my name, spoken by this stranger, hit me with the force of a physical blow. How did he know my name? A delivery service wouldn't have that information without me explicitly providing it. I looked through the peephole, and there he was, a man in a dark-colored jacket holding a plain cardboard box. He had a strange, almost unsettling smile on his face, a mixture of amusement and something far more sinister. He just stood there, waiting, as if he knew I was on the other side of that door, staring back. It was like a scene from a bad dream, and I was trapped in it that I was breathing so fast I thought I was going to hyperventilate. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, trying to process what was happening. He didn't just know my name, he knew things he shouldn't. "You live on the 3rd floor, apartment 3B, he said through the phone, his voice a chilling monotone. "You work at a startup on Elm Street, you graduated from state with a degree in computer science, and you have a sister named Sarah." He was rattling off these facts about me, details that were way too personal, way too specific. My sister Sarah? We barely talked about her. How could a delivery company know that? My mind was screaming at me to just slam the door and ignore him, but the fear had me frozen in place. The man on the other side of the door was still smiling, his eyes fixed on the peephole. He raised the box slightly, a silent, menacing gesture. "The order is here. You need to accept it." It was the same calm, unyielding tone. He wasn't asking for me to sign for it. He was demanding that I take it to him. My brain finally kicked into gear. With a surge of adrenaline, I slammed the phone against the door, ending the call, and then I backed away, fumbling for my keys. I checked the deadbolt, the chain lock, and even the little bolt on the bottom, just to be sure. I didn't care what was in that box. I wasn't going to let that man anywhere near me. My heart was pounding so hard I felt it in my ears. I took a few steps back and looked through the peephole again. He was still standing there, his hand raised as if he was about to knock. I knew I had to get help. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type. I called the delivery company's customer service number, the one listed on their website, not through the app. A woman with a cheerful voice answered. I blurted out the whole story, my voice a frantic mess. She put me on hold, and I could hear the faint sounds of her typing, but when she came back on the line, her voice was different, laced with confusion. "I'm sorry, sir. There is no such order. We don't have any drivers in your area, and the phone number you gave me doesn't belong to any of our employees." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" I stammered. "The app, the tracker, the man is right outside my door with a box." She just kept repeating the same thing, that there was no record of the order, no driver, nothing. My mind was reeling. A ghost delivery? Was I losing my mind? The world was spinning. I hung up the phone and ran back to the peephole, but this time, the hallway was empty. The man, the box, the unnerving smile, all gone. Just a long, silent hallway and the flickering light of the sensor above my door. I felt a wave of relief so intense I almost sagged to the floor. It was over, but then I looked down. Right on my welcome mat, where the man had been standing, was the box. He hadn't just disappeared. He had left the package behind. I stared at it, frozen, a plain cardboard box, with no markings, no name, no return address. It was just there, a solid, tangible piece of a nightmare that was supposed to have vanished. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at the box. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. I went back inside, grabbed a broom, and very carefully, very slowly, nudged the box away from my door, closer to the wall. It was a pathetic gesture, I know, but I couldn't think of anything else. I went back to my couch, my heart still racing, and started going through the app on my phone again. The tracking page was gone, replaced by the regular home screen. It was like none of it had ever happened. I felt so sick. I kept my eyes on the box for the rest of the night, watching it from a distance, feeling its presence in the hallway like a live, breathing thing. I didn't sleep a wink. I just sat there, waiting for something to happen, for the box to move, for a sound, anything. The night stretched on, long and silent, and I was left alone with that box and the terrifying knowledge that someone had been watching me, knew me, and had come to my door with a package I never ordered. A package I still don't know what to do with. I called the police the next morning. It was a tough conversation. How do you explain a ghost delivery man who knows your personal details and leaves a mysterious box on your doorstep? The cops were skeptical, to say the least. They looked at the box, told me it was probably a harmless prank, and asked me if I had any enemies. They even suggested I might have been drinking and imagined the whole thing. The dismissal was infuriating. I told them to take the box and test it to see if there were fingerprints, anything. They took it away, and I felt a sense of relief wash over me, a feeling that lasted only a few minutes. I still couldn't shake the feeling that I had just given them something I shouldn't have. They called me 2 days later and told me there were no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing. The box was just a box, filled with crumpled newspaper. It was empty, but it wasn't just a box. It was a symbol, a chilling reminder that someone had crossed a line, a barrier I didn't even know existed. The fear never really went away. I moved out a month later, not even bothering to find a roommate. I still get phantom notifications on my phone, and every time the bell rings, my heart leaps into my throat. The fact that the police couldn't find anything, that the company had no record, that the box was empty, it makes the whole experience feel even more sinister. It was a message, but what was the message? That they could get to me? That my life wasn't as private as I thought it was? I'll never know. I still have no idea who the man was, what he wanted, or why he picked me. But I'll never forget his face, his strange smile, and the sound of my name spoken by a stranger who knew too much. That night, I realized that some doors, once they're opened, can never be fully closed again. And some packages, even if you never accept them, will find a way to get to you.